The Dawkins and Peterson video came out, so I decided to save it for when I could watch it together with you here live. Let's look at the Dawkins versus Peterson video, and let's see where this conversation goes. I have no idea what to expect, other than I know Jordan released his book, We Who Wrestle with God, and I imagine he's going to try to funnel the conversation in that way. But I very much look forward to this. So let's begin.
I think our first point of contact, in the spirit of finding those overlapping circles of interest between you two, will be the similarities, if there are any, between the concept of a meme and the concept of an archetype. So, Professor Dawkins, perhaps you can begin by telling us, what is a meme? A meme is a virus with a liard. So it's something that spreads because it spreads because it spreads. It's something that spreads by imitation. As I understand it, an archetype is quite different from that, because an archetype is something which all humans have, as a virtue of being human, something that's built in. So it's not something that spreads as an epidemic. It's something that people have anyway. I suppose that it could turn into a meme, but I would think it would be muddying waters to even say that there's something very much in common between an archetype and a meme.
Okay, so the difference between something being intrinsic versus extrinsic. I like how Alex is suggesting there might be a similarity in concepts. Dawkins is beginning by saying that his notion of meme is much different than Jordan's notion of archetype.
Memes are not embedded into the psychology of people as
No,
they arise. They're things like the backwards baseball hat, which is not an archetype, and it's something that becomes fashionable and spreads as an epidemic around the population. Which is different from an archetype, which is sort of built in. Yes, I've heard you in the past, Dr. Peterson, say that the meme is very similar, if not almost identical to an archetype, almost as if you kept pushing the idea of what a meme is, you might end up with an archetype.
Well, I think maybe the appropriate way of tying the two ideas together, given what Dr. Dawkins just said, is to notice the fact that something spreads because it catches, right? And so things catch because they have an emotional resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And so they attract people's interest. And so they attract them in an exploratory manner. That would be one way of thinking about it. That would be attraction on the positive emotion side, or they attract them on the negative emotion side. And so that would loop the idea of the catchiness of an idea, let's say, with the more underlying motivational structures. And as the idea is more related to the action of underlying biological motivational structures, it becomes more and more expression of something that's instinctual and archetypal. Like Jung defined.
Okay, so Jordan is basically reframing it as, what makes a meme spread in the first place? Why does the backwards baseball cap idea even spread? Well, presumably it catches to some underlying structure onto an archetype. And so for a meme to succeed, the degree of the meme's success is contingent upon to what extent it utilizes the underlying archetypes. So in some sense, archetype is a deeper concept than a meme if we were to integrate these positions based on how Jordan is characterizing it.
And an archetype essentially is something like the manifestation of an instinct in image and then also in behavior. So the deepest level is something like the instinct, and that would be motivational or emotional drive. And then there's a manifestation of that in imagination and behavior. It's more culturally constructed there. And you could also imagine that there are depths of these ideas. The baseball hat idea, for example, that would be something that's manifesting itself at a very shallow level. But there's a reason that the words baseball hat caught on.
Yeah.
It speaks of the moment, for whatever reason. And it's linked to the biology through the fact that it captures interest for some reason.
So perhaps something like the archetype being a more fundamental psychological concept that memes can then play upon. The backwards captures on. See, it's implausible to me, but the idea that the archetype could be the reason why some meme will spread, that seems to...
All right, I don't want to prejudge this too much, but sometimes people will disagree just to disagree. I have no idea why Dawkins needs to say, that seems implausible. It seems implausible that the backwards baseball cap latches onto the fundamental archetype. It must just emerge like an epidemic virus. I've never thought about a Dawkins accent, but hey, that's my inspiration.
To me, it draws not really archetypes at all. But you prefer to think of memes, or you do think of memes as, you refer to them as a virus. It doesn't have to have a negative connotation. Which is the salient point.
So, but archetypal ideas do have that capacity to spread virally and to rise and fall. You see that, I think you see that in the history of religious ideas. You know, that religious ideas can be very catching, because otherwise they wouldn't spread. Now, there's variation in them like there is in languages, but there's also something that's core that makes them identifiable, let's say, as religious ideas rather than as any other sort of idea. I mean, one of the things I was really interested in was, I sent you an email at one time asking you.
Before we hear the email, so basically the question is this archetype concept a fixed, static thing, or does it change and morph? And Jordan kind of, he went with the ambiguous, like, yeah, at the very deepest levels, it's sticky, but he used the phrase, it will move as fast as the species moves. So that's like not 100% sticky, but 99.99% sticky. And then rather than thinking as like one thing being an archetype, an idea might have some percentage of it that's archetypical depending on how deep it goes. And so he might even go as far as to say we can never for sure capture the Platonic concept of an archetype in this neat and tight box. We just know that this underlying phenomenon orientation towards archetype exists. And then any idea or thought you have might slide in this kind of relative grounding to, in connection with the archetype. So, I mean, what happens is we're describing invisible abstract phenomena. And I appreciate Jordan's delicacy in trying to handle these things. The critique he gets, and I'll be curious if Dawkins attacks him on it, is because he won't provide a tight encapsulating box for the term, but such is the nature of the underlying phenomenon in the first place. All right, so let's hear about the email that they had between them.
If you had read Richard Eliot,
religious symbols, things like a battle between gods is one.
That's one.
And there might be others. It's not that convincing. I mean, it's such an obvious thing because we have human battles, and therefore an idea of battles between gods would not be that so plausible. So it doesn't strike me as a very penetrating observation.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about it, the thing that's been interesting about it is
low key
is to start to understand the nature of the universal themes and how they're expressed.
It doesn't strike me as quite a penetrating observation. It's another way of saying that's not that you're not so smart. Oh my gosh! All right, let's have the good faith conversation, shall we, Dawkins? And
one of the things I wanted to explore with you, because I think this is an idea that's at the core of the cultural conflict. And as far as I can tell, a story is a verbal account of how our perceptions and the facts that we encounter are prioritized. So, for example, when you go see a movie has a hero, and what the writers do is they show you how the hero prioritizes his perceptions, what he attends to, and how he acts. I think that's why we have a culture war.
To pause this for a second. What they'll want to discuss is why do humans have this prioritization and perception, which can only be described in the vehicle of story. How does a materialistic account of reality and the evolutionary biology that Dawkins would present, how does that give rise to this fundamental structure of life, where story is not just an added layer, it's not an evolved layer per se, on top of base reality, but rather the concept of story seems so integral to the very depths of base reality, such that our perceptions are very much affected by the story that is installed in our head.
Going on, at least in part, is because the idea that
the fact that I care about are the facts that are true and images going for them. I'm not that interested in symbols. I think Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
So real quick, what I want to know is is it possible to say that the only thing I care about is truth, facts, and evidence? Is that an actually executable story? Because what does it even mean to say facts, truth, evidence? How to even perceive facts and truth and evidence outside of the context of a story? So we'll see. It might be a begging the question type of claim. I'll be curious to see how they address that.
The sphere of adventure.
All right. So Dawkins' question is teasing out the tension between when you say Cain, when you talk about these archetypes, are you talking about real, literal people and experiences, or are you just using this as a vehicle, as a placeholder to describe the underlying archetype? And again, Dawkins, for reasons, denies the use of the symbols, as he just mentioned here.
Cain represents is an eternal pattern. It's a higher level of existence.
Well, pretending you think they really existed, because you wouldn't have said they were born in a natural way. Unless you were mothering up facts with symbols there, because you don't think that Cain and Abel existed.
Well, I can imagine a situation where when the story was originated, that it referred to two actual brothers, but as the stories propagate across time, as they mutate, as they adapt, let's say, to the structure of human memory, they deepen and they become the more fundamental levels of conflict that exist within human beings, which is what you see in more sophisticated literature. There's loads of unsophisticated ways of approaching a text.
Okay, let's see what Professor Dawkins thinks about this.
Alex had to interrupt that. Okay, so let's rephrase what they're talking about. You have the words in scripture, right? Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. There was jealousy. So the question is, those words on the page, are they describing in a very literal sense the exact situation of a man named Cain and a man named Abel? Or is it describing the pattern of human behavior or some hybrid of those? And Jordan is saying that by the time the story was written down into text, it had already been cultivated where the seed of the original conflict, whatever that was, whatever brothers existed, whatever that conflict was, the seed has now blossomed into this deeper fruit and tree with its fruits. And that is what we write down in the scriptures. It's this broader connection to the deep patterns of human behavior, such that the way the sentences were written down, the way aspects of the story morphed in a way that it wasn't just, let me write down a story about two brothers, but again, it had this deeper connotation. Now, Dawkins' question is, well, did this original story of the two brothers happen? Well, it's like, well, which story? Like the story that was written down here, again, is like a metamorphized version, an elevated version of the original story. But the original story could have been based, maybe there was some tribe and two brothers got in a fight. And maybe that is a real experience that left its imprint, left its trauma onto the tribe, onto the descendants of the tribe. And so then that trauma was propagated through memory, through the different layers of meaning, until finally it was written down into the story of Cain and Abel. Then the question is, was the story of Cain and Abel true? Well, what do we mean by that? Again, it is true in describing the present human dynamic and in a chronological propagation of it. This spirit of murdering brother has existed since the very beginning. And so the story's message of this spirit is true. Now, is it true in the sense of like a historical record of, the first human-born sons were, Cain and Abel, and then they, Cain murdered Abel? We don't know, but that's not the claim. You don't even have to make that claim. It's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter, at least as far as the framework that Jordan's proposing.
I suppose I'm a literalist. Homo sapiens called Cain.
It's irrelevant.
murders his
In
brother.
a sense, it's irrelevant to me because even if they were real, we don't know anything about them.
Even if they weren't real, they weren't real.
Like I said, it could have been the case that when the story originated.
Peterson has more intellectual humility, because the true answer from our position is we can't say for sure. We don't really know. Whereas Dawkins says, of course they weren't real. Of course they weren't real. which again, he cannot possibly know, words for the axioms he chooses to implement in his worldview.
Way back when it originated, that the first people.
What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
Well, I think they were a great writer
Because you can look at the content of what was written. You have to read a biography about the writers of Genesis.
I think I understand the patterning of the stories and what it points to. I think the idea, for example, that
Crazy.
Cain and Abel are emblematic of two opposed patterns of adaptation to the world is brilliant. It's almost brilliant beyond imagining.
If you don't think it's brilliant, you're guilty of reductionism, which, a lot of atheists are just stuck in this reductionist mindset of chopping away everything that's beautiful and reducing it to just, here's just the survival adaptation strategy.
Because the story is so insanely compressed.
You think the author of that story in Genesis was a literary genius?
Oh, come on, bro. This is like this is a loaded question.
I think that there's a.
Does Dawkins have any interest in it?
Millennia crafting that story so that it has almost an infinite. The idea of sacrifice becomes more and more sophisticated. It's more and more elaborated. It's more and more specified. It's more and more embodied. It's obvious progression.
But what is the progression? Where do you see that progression in successive manuscripts? Or
is Dawkins just really struggling with this? Jordan's very clear. You see the concept of sacrifice progressing, starting from, where even, the animals sacrificed the clothes, Adam and Eve, Abel offering the first fruits to God, the sacrifice economy, and all of this stuff. And then, of course, the concept of Jesus Christ, right? That's the ultimate embodiment of what it means for God to sacrifice. Is it clear? Jordan was very clear. I don't understand what Dawkins, is he trying not to understand? Is it clear, if you look at the Bible, from the Old Testament to the New and throughout, a clear transformation and elevation of the concept of sacrifice, the revelation of love. And so Jordan is simply saying that, even that process, starting with Genesis, could have been rewinded to even a more primitive state based on the same extrapolation.
In the successive stories as the text progresses.
Okay, the criticism is the Bible as a text gives us nothing to indicate that it has divine origin. There's nothing that we can read in it where we think there's no way this idea could have evolved were it not divinely put into this text. That's a criticism that has been made in the past.
I think it's reflective of some order that shaped your sound.
I don't even know if in theory you could judge something to be of divine or non-divine origin. Like, there's no way to falsify that hypothesis. Like what are the necessary attributes of a divinely inspired writing versus the necessary attributes of a non-divinely inspired writing? If there's access to hidden knowledge that can only be revealed, that would be divine because you'd have to tap into some other source. So, of course, prophecies, fulfilled prophecies, knowledge of the future that then gets fulfilled, that would be evidence of the divine. But separate from prophecies, what would be the necessary features for something to be judged as being divinely inspired? Could it be that it offers such a deep understanding into the nature of reality and humans that it's beyond the IQ of any individual human or even the collective knowledge? And even then, how could you measure that threshold? So it's almost an unanswerable question. Because again, the point is, if you have a sentence that you knew was divinely inspired, could you also, through a separate process, produce that same exact sentence through a non-divine process and get the same exact sentences? Well, conceivably, you could get the same exact sentences from the divine process and from the non-divine process. So then if all you're looking at is just this single output, you don't really know which way it came from. Did it come from the divine way or the non-divine way? So, that's a little bit of the mystery. But again, we have prophecy and then we have miracles. So I think that would be, at the end of the day, that's going to be the greatest indicator of divinity.
And implicit, that there isn't a better way of describing it than divine.
The point is the divine can work through the non-divine. I mean, that's the nature of mind and body intertwined. That's the nature of the incarnation. And so the point is you don't even need to separate these things as here's this clean, pure, divine path, and here's undivine. Divine works through the undivine. God works through the human intermediaries always. So you're never going to be able to find something that's purely divine, because even Christ himself was fully divine and fully man. And Dawkins' threshold of give me something that's purely divine, untainted by any trace of human, it's just an impossible standard. You're not going to find it.
In fact, that union is equivalent to what's being described as divine order across millennia.
Are you saying that Jesus really Jesus really did die for our sins? I mean, do you believe that? Do you believe that as a fact, that Jesus died for our sins?
So Dawkins should be asked to clarify what Dawkins means when he says died for our sins, Jesus died, but let's see what Jordan says.
There are elements of the texts that I don't claim to understand. What my experience has been that the more deeply I look into these texts, the more I am. Doesn't mean that I can proclaim full knowledge of what the texts proclaim.
Quantum physics is deeply mysterious, and you're saying that biblical texts are deeply mysterious. The difference is quantum physics, predictions that are derived from quantum physics, are fulfilled to the umpteenth decimal place. Here, umpteenth decimal place, I mean, I think Richard Feynman says equivalent to predicting the width of North America to the nearest hair's breadth. Now, that's impressive. That's
No doubt.
the mystery there, as it were, gains its credentials by its predictions. The mysteries of the Bible don't have any credentials at all, as far as I can make out.
Well, I guess.
Oh, man. These guys like Dawkins irritate me. They irritate me because they're all about rhetoric and satirizing, like Jordan said. So, yes, on the one hand, if you talk about measurement via physical distance and approximation, and yes, you can measure the particle and where it goes in a very super specific, billionth of whatever unit. Again, such that you can measure the, as he said, the United States down to a single hair. We're talking about visual distance and a physical metric, but that's not to deny the precision of measurement that occurs in the spiritual life and the psychological life. So the credentials of the Bible are that it provides a very deep understanding, again, on these spiritual psychological dimensions, which by nature are not measurable like taking a ruler, in the physical space. So, yes, quantum physics is in this physical space, but the point of what the biblical texts do and the horizons they take you is in the domain of knowledge. Spiritual and psychological is just as valid as a domain of knowledge. Whereas people like Dawkins disregard the knowability of these other domains, and they prioritize physical knowledge above all else to an extreme degree. That is the position of scientism.
The credentials that I would. You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian.
I just want to say, this is an aesthetic thing. Jordan Peterson is far more polite than Dawkins. Let's just face the facts here. But, hey, we have to tolerate our atheist brethren, even if they don't always extend the same courtesies. Alex, though, is usually pretty good. I like Alex.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right allows you to make a statement like that. I mean, I know that
Right.
there's differences, perhaps in what we.
This is challenging Dawkins on his reductionist theory because Dawkins keeps dismissing what are the credentials of the Bible? Oh, what's this, that? As if it's zero, right? He keeps squishing it down to zero. Jordan Peterson's right now asking, well, Dawkins, are you saying it's zero? Or surely maybe you say it's 10, 15, 20, let's say out of 100. There's got to be some positive value, like real value, not just hallucinated psychological usefulness, but that there's some real value. And so, Dawkins, would you clarify for us what is the real value of the biblical text, the Christian story? Because you yourself acknowledge that, and because we need cultural Christianity, there is some value. So, Dawkins, will you answer what is at least some of the value in the biblical text? Objective value.
We both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this. But did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. They meant by that.
Oh my God.
Real
Like
more
you're
that
saying
I
God
brought up
These guys are
in the
doing
Christian culture.
Oh my
I
God.
went to Christian school. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I
It's virtually
That's
nothing.
all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system before.
Oh man.
Okay, so let me ask you, Luke, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not.
I
The first question
love
is,
that. I love that. Jordan knows he's dealing with someone who's being emotional, traumatized, and he says, well, maybe that's true, but perhaps it's not. So again, trying to encourage Dawkins to take a curious approach of humility as opposed to the arrogance that so often accompanies the atheistic position. I'm sorry, my atheist friends. It just is what it is. I mean, it's just every time, unfortunately.
like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms
Rank
of their
order.
ethical validity?
Oh, there we go.
And for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes,
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
there is a hierarchy.
A hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which threshes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to kiss Islam on a lower level than Christianity, because not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
It might
Sure,
be to
sure.
say something more Christianity. Like, I think that question is open because
Of course.
you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular positions and towards something that you.
This is, yeah, I mean, sorry, I keep interrupting if you want to keep listening to them, but look, Dawkins, again, classic emotional rhetorical appeal to morality that we know, right? So he says, some of these cultures remove, the clitondectomy. They throw gay people off the roofs. Obviously, that's bad, duh. And so that's not as bad as Christianity. When we say obviously that's bad, that's saying, yes, because I can say it's bad in reference to this objective hierarchical structure that we can use to evaluate things. And that's where Jordan's point is, that there is an objective hierarchical structure and this moral realism, moral subjectivism. And a lot of atheists, they can't be honest about the grounding for objective morality. Again, I know I'm speaking a little harshly here. I just find responses like Dawkins quite annoying. It's useful for like an angry teenager, but for anyone serious, it's pretty low IQ.
Regard as more ethically appropriate. This isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim, and there's not very much to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings. It's already a very virtuous achievement. So
I don't know. I don't know if that's true because if you look at
How can you say virtues from
you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
well,
People are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
yes, they are.
There we go.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty, and the fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems so evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise. that has nothing to do with the truth value. And what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christian Muslims.
So Dawkins must say that to claim that something is ethically better than something else is not a truth claim. It's not a truth value. That's an absurd proposition. Let's see if Jordan will call him out on it.
The resurrection, the miracles, do you believe in any of those?
Okay, nice deflection when atheists when they get pressed on the objective morality, and Dawkins has experienced it enough to know that that's where this was going to go. Let's divert to the more, extreme, wondrous, physics-defying examples that religion provides. Let's avoid the hard issues of morality and let's completely change and redirect the subject through the use of imagery and rhetoric. Nice job, Dawkins. Way to take the question head on. Not.
In believe Jesus was born of a virgin.
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is both men and women carry the image of God, both. And this is a certain tone to everything that follows. It is a remarkable proclamation, given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this long, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
And my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions.
Alex O'Connor rescuing Dawkins from that bomb.
Okay. This is asked quite directly. We still haven't really heard an answer.
Okay.
Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about this.
Well, okay, so this is like a very compressed way to say that a utilitarian framework, the society won't work. Well, what does it mean for society to work? For people to live long lives? Okay, well, it's more than that for people, and that's not necessarily even a good thing, per se. For there to be harmony, peace, love, right? If we start talking about those things, we get into the interior life, the spiritual realm. But that's exactly what Dawkins keeps deflecting and trying to squash. And so, atheists, they set the stage of the game based on the rules that they want to set, even though the game that they set up is a subset of the entire game of reality. So Jordan is trying to appeal to the entire game of reality. The atheist trick is to narrow and play a smaller game and pretend that game is representative of entire reality when they know it is not.
I think you must understand when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And isn't there also that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Christian to the virgin of birth.
Yes.
The virgin birth was called from his translation of Isaiah. You know that.
No, it's not a perfectly historically loaded question.
What would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
I know.
I
think about this. Yeah.
And I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that. And I know that your question is more than valid, but
You're talking about in Isaiah, the verse that the prophecy that could mean young woman or could mean virgin. And again, Dawkins is in the business of playing zinger gauches. He's not actually trying to learn anything here. He's not trying to understand. He's trying to find ways to attack and zinger because for him, the only game he can play is the game of power. He unfortunately, his worldview doesn't give him alternative games to play, but he is created in the image of God. So even while he plays these games of power in this conversation, the fact is, maybe the little good voice that's still inside of Dawkins does want to listen, but it's going to take careful maneuvering to get any kind of insight into Dawkins on these matters. But hey, God can soften the hearts.
The issue, as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because when we started this conversation, it's reasonable that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so it's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines. We have to prioritize our paths. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures toward life abundant. And there are other patterns,
towards life,
the pattern of Cain, for example.
Towards life abundant, right? When Alex O'Connor says it's something that makes society work, we say life abundant. Abundant life. Well, what is abundant life? We have to unpack the inner peace, the love. These are very real things, right? And again, atheists don't like to talk about these things because they purposely narrow the game in terms of that which you can measure with a ruler and in the physical realm.
That lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to constrain that sort of truth. We talk about the oppression of women, for example. How do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question. And don't seem to I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And the word answer is.
See, Dawkins refuses to answer the moral questions, trying to create them as a separate category. Because again, I don't know what's in his heart, if he's purposely being dishonest, or if he's lied to himself so much that he can't see it. But I'll try not to pause it as much. I just get really irritated. Because once you've seen enough of these conversations, you see the pattern. I was hoping that there would be something new that happens here in this conversation, some new ground, a new frontier. But at this point, I think most of the ground, if not all, has already been covered. And really, an atheist decision is just to remain hard-hearted or not. That's what it comes down to. There's no argument that they could be convinced of, except for them deciding to open their horizon and see more data. But the atheist doesn't want to deal with the abundance of data. They want to play the subset game as opposed to look at the entire game of life, which entails the spiritual components.
It's a different kind of question.
Father and a heavenly Father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin then. He was saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin.
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Yeah. Well, and that being said, even though Dawkins is dodging all the moral questions, it is a worthwhile question to ask. The virgin birth is a really important one, and it's important whether it happened literally or not. And so I do, that is Jordan's weakness, and I understand Dawkins wants to grill him and poke him on the weakness, which fair enough, from a perspective of power, that's the way to go. But, I hope Dawkins actually is honest about the moral questions, but let's see how Jordan will squirm out of the question for the virgin birth. I am curious.
It's not that your question. You must understand what you're being asked. That even if you think that, say, the author of biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point the gospel authors were getting at, it needs to be clarified before we can begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from the scientifics.
Well, it doesn't need to be. Again, Jordan's position is I can remain agnostic about whether this literally happened and still accept the deeper truths that are being revealed. You don't have to first establish something scientifically and only then deal with the deeper truth. You can have the deeper truth without declaring a verdict on the scientific thing. Just like in the same sense, we have access to deep truths about human beings without necessarily having to accept a scientific position on the origin of humanity in the way that the church allows for different interpretations of evolution, or to what extent humans participated in the Darwinian view or made the creation story without evolution. You're allowed to be agnostic on those matters. But I'm still curious. We're all curious. We'd all like to know, Jordan, what's your view? Did the virgin birth literally happen?
And maybe you think that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use the question about to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
First thing in English, suppose we were asking out of interest, suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest. Really, did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, and because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked, and the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. We have to prioritize.
So to use the language I've been trying to use here, Jordan is saying that there's no reason to suggest that the subset game, the small game that Dawkins is playing, is sufficient to empower you to navigate in the actual game of life, which is a bigger game in life. Because again, if all you're focusing on is scientific truth, you can't actually go about living your life on those. That's insufficient knowledge. It doesn't provide you with the actual full truth of how to live life and what you need to do, what to aim at, how to prioritize the facts. Like science itself doesn't give you any sense of what to prioritize, who to become, what kind of story to play out, and how to get inner peace, love, all of that. So it's not, science can't help you with that.
It's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the treat and falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts.
Let's talk about this, perhaps. But maybe a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. That Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption?
Yeah,
you can
Jordan likes that question. Hey, you know what, Alex? That's a great question. I don't mean to cut you off, but I love that. Underneath the scientific enterprise lies some unscientific assumptions. Great question.
Investigations in the world, and in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truths. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of space?
Yeah,
I suppose it does. I think that, let me just be direction, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is.
Sorry to keep interrupting here. So I would say, if I had carte blanche here, that Dawkins might be unaware, because what you're looking at here, right, is not just a man engaging in science, but he's a relational being. And I actually don't know his status. I don't know if he's married or has children, but he is a son. He definitely is a son. He was born by someone else. He has friends, right? He has, those things are connected to myth and story. And that's the primary thing of life. And if not close friends, he is this role of professor in society and speaker, and people want to listen to what he says, and he holds these big audiences. He's in relationship with these audiences. He himself is playing out the actor, the hero of a story. And so for him to say the myth is secondary, well, actually, he's living out the myth. primarily, it's his motivation for getting up every single day. It has nothing to do with science. And so maybe it's a self-awareness issue. I don't know, but that I think, yeah, that's my claim.
The history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to Hogarth's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. The mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
It's not about league, major, minor league. It's qualitatively a different type of claim. So again, the precision in the spiritual life is different than the precision in the physical life. And those are just, they're measuring different things. Again, Dawkins can say that the physical life is more important than the spiritual life. Of course, I would say, number one, false dichotomy. Number two, just not true.
A change in man is still believe. Well, okay, so let me respond to that. So one of the things that I've tried to study is the preconditions for the scientific enterprise itself. You appeared to agree with Alex that there might be assumptions, axioms that need to be accepted. I don't want to put words in your mouth because I want to get this right before the scientific enterprise can begin. So I've tried to think those through. So let me lay out a couple of them. This is partly what I've done while trying to make the case, for example, that you're more of a Christian than you think you are. So, for example, I think that the scientific enterprise is...
You're more of a Christian than you think you are. So Jordan is appealing to this idea that I just said of Dawkins lacking from self-awareness, right? So that's, I'm glad we're on the same wavelength.
Motivated by the axiomatic presumption that truth tends towards a unity. I think that it's predicated on the notion that there is a logical order that's intrinsic to the cosmos, that fundamental order is good, that it's intelligible to human beings, and that discovering that order and aligning ourselves with it makes for life more abundant. I think that the scientific enterprise is also predicated on the idea that the truth will set you free. If all of those axioms are religious, he says something very, very peculiar. He says, having the Israelites gather together all their bronze and make a giant stake and put his...
Real quick, I think this is really important. Before talking about what God did, Jordan outlines, here's what God could have done instead. Now, why even posit that, right? God could have removed the snakes, or he said, nah, forget the Israelites, right? More snakes. The purpose of even setting that is because that would be the ordinary human reason. Going even back to the question of, if you're going to create a story, what? Just listen to what God actually does here. It's pretty profound. If you don't think it's profound, then maybe you're not opening your heart up to it, right? And that's the thing ultimately. How does one get moved by beauty? When you encounter beauty, you encounter something greater than you that subsumes you, right? Anyway, so this would be like answering Dawkins is what's the word? Yeah, just his reductionist attitude. Okay.
Bronze, which is the symbol of healing, by the way, that even the Greeks used, that symbol of the scabies. It's a very old symbol, very widespread. It's still used by physicians today. Okay, that's pretty damn interesting and quite remarkable. And that symbol is used, for example, by the Greeks to symbolize medicine as such.
So, what makes this so profound is because you can connect this in your own life. You can look at the things that are most poisonous in your own life, the things causing you fear, the great burdens that you have, and you can understand what it means, confront those things directly, and Yeah, so that's not a scientific truth. That's not something about measuring the distance between two particles, but yet it's much deeper and more profound than any other fact or piece of truth you can encounter. And so what really matters, what is the greater fact to prioritize? I don't know what Dawkins is worried about, right? He's not a particularly vulnerable person, but those are really the questions, kind of the questions of the heart that are most relevant to discussions like these, and most relevant to understanding the truth of Christ.
Weird twist, which is Christ identified with that bronze serpent. If we were courageous enough to look in the face unflinchingly, and if we spent our time putting our finger on the source of evil, it would revitalize ourselves to a degree that would be unimaginable.
Revitalize us in a way that would be unimaginable. That same concept in the abstract formulation is conveyed concretely when we talk about the resurrection. And so you could say understanding the resurrection through the imagery, through the narrative and the story is the vehicle to deliver this abstract concept of unimaginable ways, a sense becoming so much greater, right? But you couldn't really you can't really create a meme of a story without the actual concrete symbolic layers and narrative. You can't just provide an abstract analysis. And so the purpose of these stories at minimum is to create tangible incarnational representations of the deeper truths. The deeper truths are more platonic. They're more airy. They use words that are, hard to pinpoint. Again, unimaginable ascendance or whatever he said, right? So that's one observation here. But that being said, just because those stories are vehicles for delivering those truths doesn't mean that they aren't actually true in of themselves, right? And so that's the point here. As a Christian, you should recognize that these stories are true in and of themselves, and they deliver these deeper, profound truths to life. Jordan is saying, well, there's a deeper, profound truth of life. Let's not discuss, the literal truth of these things, because I can't convince the atheists of that, because Jordan likes to play in the frontier of things, the border of things. Whereas the atheist here is saying, well, I don't really care about these deeper, profound truths if you can't convince me that the literal thing being described actually happened.
Have our own ideas and the rejuvenation.
That harmony between that New Testament Jesus and that Old Testament story, which is so profound and so impressive that it's difficult to imagine it having sort of naive human authorship. What do you make of that story and that assertion?
It doesn't impress me, and I don't understand why you would say that.
Here you go again. The reductive nature. See, this is an issue of the heart, not the intellect. It doesn't impress me. In the fact that the New Testament has the same rhyming scheme at a deeper level, which he's Christ on the cross. And that's kind of like the Old Testament. Not impressive at all. Well, okay. All right. Have you ever been impressed by anything beautiful? Have you encountered a work of art that just took your breath away? Have you encountered nature? Dawkins, has your heart ever been moved by anything? Or was your heart robbed from you when you were a child? Was your innocence taken away and you've never been able to fully experience life since that moment?
I don't think Lord Jesus said it had divine inspiration. I mean,
Is it possible that some kind of genius moral move or literary move could also indicate that this is something more impressive?
more or less not.
Yeah. So this is back to earlier in the video. What would a divinely written message look like in theory? Like, could you recognize the properties of the divine such that it were obvious to anyone looking, or would that be impossible to falsify? And I like Alec how he just asked the question, could you see some morally genius move or something like this, as opposed to, let's say, Dawkins would be convinced he was a human being who had advanced scientific knowledge of like the structure of DNA or something that he wouldn't have otherwise had access to, access to hidden knowledge. But we do have the prophecies, which is access to hidden knowledge. But anyway, I appreciate that Alex asked the question. Let's see what Dawkins says.
asked me whether what would impress me, and I'm a naive naturalist, so I would say, um, if any prophet had said something like, a world is just one object in rotating around the sun, something like that. They never do. And it's always this some kind of moral that which leaves me cold.
Well, why is it that there is no
Question, yeah.
this is
Good
God
question.
meets you where you're at, right? And there are some people who just care about scientific truths.
Well, and let me say this. The question of why don't we see a prophet revealing some, super indisputable fact in precise language? There's two thoughts in my head about this that will make this an important question. Number one, I mean, it's a fair question, right? And if they did so, you could argue it's the same type of question as why doesn't God split the sky open right now and wave hello? Then everyone would see him and no one would doubt, right? So it's the mystery of veiled representation. Why doesn't God reveal himself 100% right now, all at once? Could humans even handle that revelation? And if they could they handle it while still preserving free will, or would they have no choice? And as part of the hero's journey and the veiled presentation that God has created, as part of that journey, a formation of you to divinize you, because you need to go through that journey of wrestling. So I'd say yes. So on the one hand, we could say that you don't see something like that in the Old Testament or in the scriptures, because it would remove the possibility of fate. Now that could be an unfalsifiable cop-out, right? So, I mean, you might not like that answer. Another way to tackle this, in my mind, would be to say, well, even with the prophets, it wasn't that God was auto-narrating through them, like possessing them and then they spoke, but God always works through the mysterious medium, human beings and human minds. And so humans wouldn't have had the language or the mental concepts to talk about, coronary bypass, right? Brain surgery, like stuff like that. Even if they received the vision, even if God gave them a vision, here's how you perform surgery on the brain, how would the humans write that down into a text? They would, they might speak symbolically, even like in the book of Revelation, like, there I saw the great fleshly thing, and there was a laser. They wouldn't even have the language that we use today to describe the concepts. And they wouldn't have the language that we've invented 2,000 years later to describe the minutiae. Even if they talked about DNA, they wouldn't have used the word DNA, right? They would have used other language. And so it's unclear to me how they could have communicated that before. The question is, why don't the figures in the Bible use a language that would be common in the year 2024 AD? Well, I think it would be unreasonable to expect them to use that type of language. Now, again, even if they don't use that specific type of language, we could argue that, that's for whatever reason outside of God's revelation and what prophecy is meant to fulfill and how we should prioritize things. Because I think you could say that it's not really a priority, especially in the ancient world, to convince people of your vast scientific knowledge. Like, the goal of the Bible is not to convince you that Jesus could conduct perfect brain surgery, even though he could have. No one cared about that. We didn't really care about science, culturally till the age of the Enlightenment in modernity. So expecting an ancient text to provide validity to people in a way that they would like it 1,500 years later, 2,000 years later, it's unreasonable. Because think about human beings if we live into the year 4,000. Well, should we expect the ancient text to provide the type of evidence that people in the year 4,000 are going to want? So the question is not, does it provide the type of evidence that I want? The question is, well, what kind of evidence does it provide? And separate from my own biases in the game that I want to play, is that evidence meritorious and worthwhile to stand on its own ground? All right, let's see how Jordan answers the question. I'm curious.
That's they know that's why is there not anything in the Bible for them?
I think the idea that Christ is the basis of the community is a remarkable and scientifically valid hypothesis. I think that it's precisely akin to the, what would you say, to the process of cortical maturation. I think they're the same thing.
I think for you may drag the mundane up into the realm of divinity. I think people like Richard, and for many people listening, what it doesn't say is drags the divine down to the realm of the mundane.
Very well put.
But that's exactly what happens with Jesus Christ. See, the beauty and mystery of the faith is the intertwining of mind and body, of human and divine. And it's a paradox, it's a mystery. And so if you only see one side of the coin, it looks like the divine becoming human, pulling the divine down to the humanity. If you look at the other side of the coin, you see humanity being elevated to the divine. And that entire process is what the core mystery of Christianity is. And so what you're seeing is people looking at it on both sides. See, if Jordan, I mean, I would be surprised if Jordan doesn't mention the incarnation of Christ as a response to this question by Alice.
But there's an unsung solution that's stood and get the same checkout Daily Wire uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/JBP today to upgrade your selling. That's shopify.com/JBP.
Well, I don't know why it would drag the divine down into the realm of the mundane if we're speaking of something like the straight and narrow path of harmony between multiple modes of being. I don't think it doesn't make any difference to me whether it's the material reaching upward or the divine descending downward. I don't think there's any difference between those two beings.
You're right, that's the problem.
You can see the difference.
You can persuade.
I'm very interested in the possibility that truths emerge through evolving manuscripts. And that's a very interesting idea. And it's totally different from divine inspiration. And I want to, because I don't
Unless the divine works through the process, right? There doesn't need to be divine inspiration. Doesn't have to be an instantaneous injection, where I'm being possessed by the Spirit and then saying something. It can occur through a process. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but these things aren't necessarily in opposition.
even divine inspiration. We would be prepared to believe in evolving manuscripts.
1974. Before I click play, let me think what was covered last time between Dawkins and Peterson that I thought was noteworthy. Yeah, it had a lot to do with Dawkins narrowing the focus of the game, which is often an atheistic perception or tactic, maybe unwittingly. I'm not saying it's done by intention, but there's a whole world of experience, and then the atheist takes different axioms and presuppositions and funnels sounds like a tickly funnel, funnels the conversation towards reductionist and a limited experience. So let's take a look at the rest of this video. 3, 2, 1.
Great book. Talia told me that she believed that if the Academy would have turned to Eric Neumann, they're the same thing.
What do you think,
It's the
Eric?
same story.
I don't know what to make of that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you could just say that the storytelling narrative that humans use culturally is somehow an extension of the biological hypothalamus dynamic. And I don't think the atheists would find that particularly convincing enough to give up their reductive position. But hey, let's see what Dawkins has to say.
you say they're the same story. You analogize the dragon fight to
Well, how many
fighting
dragons have you
Satan.
overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality.
Okay, so I read a book a while back that described the biological reality of the dragon. Say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, okay, is there such a thing as a predator?
Of course.
Well, that's a meta category. What's the category of predator? Bear, eagle, if you're a primate. Fire? Is fire a predator?
No.
Well, it's complicated because a fire kills you. Okay, so is there a worse predator than serpentine, flying, fire-breathing reptile? Is that not the imagistic equivalent of predator? So in what way, if predator is real, in what way isn't dragon real? It doesn't take that much imagination to see the identity. And then wouldn't the fundamental task of edible primates be to figure out how to overcome the dragon forever?
Pretty good
Why you
bridge.
say dragon? I mean, we have lions, we have tigers, we have saber-tooths, we have
Why not
tyrannosaurs
abstract?
out there.
Right, but why not abstract? Because it's for the same reason that we have the term predator. Like, we have the term bear, lion.
Right.
Komodo dragon.
Dawkins is obnoxiously not allowing an abstraction.
The relevant set of features is an image. Well, what's the image? Predator as such. Well, what's the image of that? The dragon that never disappears. If you want to identify a particular class of predator, well, then lion is a good term.
You would say that lions are an instantiation of this bracket term of predator.
Well, and I would also say...
Would you therefore say that a lion is an instantiation of the bracket term of dragon?
It's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because... See... Because we're not only fact-oriented creatures, right? It actually matters to us whether we get eaten. Like, it's one thing to lay out the nomenclature of the animal kingdom, but it's another thing to remember that predators can eat you. And then it's another thing, and this is very interesting, and it's relevant to that story of the bronze serpent. It's like, what do we want to teach our children? Well, to identify predators, obviously. Well, what do we want to teach them more profoundly? What attitudes they should take towards the eternal fact of the predator. And the attitude they should take is something like the courage to voluntarily confront, and not to run away, and not to hide, and not to freeze.
Yeah, no, I love this actually. This is pretty good. So let me translate this. So you have different dangers. You have lion, you have fire, you have serpents. And you can use the catch-all word, predator, to describe and identify those things. But just identifying those things without identifying your relation and your attitude and the story of your encounter with those things seems insufficient and not useful. So Jordan's saying by using the word dragon, we're not just merely providing a topological description or a bracket, as Alex said, of the different types of predators, but we're evoking these concepts and these conflicts as the human encounters the predator, because humans can't deal with facts in isolation. Now, the scientist tries to say, well, yes, they can. Let's just treat these things separate from how humans need to interact with them. But Jordan's whole point is that this paradigm of facts independent of observation is outdated. Just like quantum physics always says, your observation affects the outcome. Your act of observing affects the observation. And so I think Jordan is stressing that rather than discarding these extra-tiered, beautiful uses of expression like dragon, we should actually reintegrate those into our use of language, because we as humans cannot separate value from fact, and the word dragon in this case incorporates the weight of value alongside the fact of predator. And I think that's a fair point. I think what he's really doing is he's challenging the atheistic attitude of reductionism and trying to create rational force to motivate the atheist to abandon his reductionist viewpoint.
And not to casually demonize, but to assume that in the combat with the eternal predator, an eternal treasure might be found. And that's exactly what you do, whether you know it or not, when you teach a child to be courageous. And we know from the psychological literature that generalizes. And I do think it's identical with the mechanism of learning in human beings, because kids Us, we always learn on the edge. You know, in your own life, you know,
So
and I don't want to be presumptuous, but no doubt there have been
can you
situations
teach a
where
kid?
you've been battling.
Yeah, can you teach a kid scientific facts without the narrative in the hero's journey?
New to learn. That's a sacrifice. You have to kill your stupidity so that you can move forward. That's what happens in the story of Abraham, by the way, when he makes sequential sacrifices. So in the story of Abraham,
I think we just have to agree that we have different kinds of minds, and you're interested in symbols, and I'm interested in facts.
one of the things that you're doing in psychotherapy when you get people to expose themselves to, you could say predators, because that's an accurate way of dealing with it, is that you get them to shift into a mode of voluntary confrontation instead of prey-like apprehension and retreat. And what they learn from that is that they can embody that pattern, which I would call a spirit metaphysically. They can embody that, they can practice it. It's also the case, there's some evidence that there's epigenetic consequences of that. If you practice that process of voluntary confrontation with the terrible unknown, it can catalyze transformations that reach all the way down into the cellular.
Yeah, I believe
And
that.
so
That's
we
why my son is a
abstracted the
relentless
fight with the
explorer. It
predator
must be because of
into
my
the
epigenetic
imaginal
decisions.
space. We play out various tactics. Some of them are conserved and transmitted. They adapt themselves to the structure of human memory, and they make the foundation for our most fundamental narratives. Look, you know, the reference I made.
Don't you think there needs to be a rap song with Jordan Peterson just rapping on all these concepts?
References. You know, we spend most of our computational, high-end computational power generating fictional worlds where we can portray meme battles so that everyone can observe them.
Yes. So lion as genetic, dragon as mimetic. Richard, this concept of the dragon as the abstracted predator as a whole, can we talk meaningfully about the truth in these stories where instead of talking about a predator or this predator or that predator, we're talking about the concept of
The
predators as a
dragon's a
whole?
meme.
Yes.
The dragon's a meme.
Yeah.
It's a deep meme.
Well, it doesn't get me. It doesn't impress me. I mean, I like reality, it obviously impresses Jordan, and that's fine. It just, we have a different kind of mind, I think.
Well, I had a comment about that too, you know, because I actually think that's true. So there's a psychological trait, openness, and openness fractionates into two types.
You're not open.
One type of mind is associated with deep interest in ideas. People like that tend to prefer nonfiction. A variant of that is openness proper, and it's associated with a much deeper orientation towards the fictional and metaphorical. I do think we have different kinds of minds, but if we accept the presumption that there is a unity of knowledge, and I don't know if that's a presumption that you entertain or presume or share, because we could discuss the alternative. My sense is that those two pathways have to unify. Now, I don't think we know how to unify them in the West. That's why there is this conflict between the scientific and the religious. But there's a reason that the idea of meme gripped you, and there's a reason it spread. It's because you put your finger on something. So can I ask you how that idea emerged and why it attracted you?
I wanted to make the point that DNA is not the only possible replicator you could imagine.
Right?
There might be on other, and there probably is on other planets, a different kind of replicator, not DNA. And then I thought, maybe we don't have to go to other planets. Maybe there's another replicator staring us in the face. The virus of the mind. Something that spreads not by DNA replication, but by imitation from mind to mind. So it could be a fashion in clothes, it could be a musical style, it could be an accent, a speech accent, it could be
Just to cut him off for a second. So if Dawkins is interested in talking about the musical style, the fashion, these things, why wouldn't he be interested in talking about the concept of the dragon, right? It doesn't make sense. He's being selectively disinterested, and that's what Jordan is trying to hopefully make evident to him, because Dawkins is interested in beyond just the DNA sequencing and how genetic change occurs from one generation to the next. He's talking about operations of the mind, of culture, metaphysical things, especially when he talks about memes. So selective disinterest is what we're seeing here with Dawkins.
A children's game that spreads through
Yeah.
school. All these things are replicators which spread by a non-genetic means and might therefore potentially be the basis for a form of Darwinian selection.
Yep.
Darwinian selection would be popularity, the spreadability of an idea.
The longevity of an idea?
Yes, longevity of an idea, the spreadability, the fidelity of it, of the idea.
How about the grip of motivation by the idea? Okay, so then you could imagine a situation where there was, I think I've got this right, a Baldwin effect
Yes.
between the meme and the genome. So I don't understand why you're not
I
impressed by
started
that.
talking about the Baldwin effect and suddenly got into women, what women like. I mean,
Well, the men who act out the heroic
Yes,
meme
yes.
are much...
it was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or a learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example, or potato washing by Japanese macaques, or opening milk bottles by English tits. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of copying, and that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, that I would say that that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
Now that's
yes.
a fascinating idea.
Yes.
Okay.
How is that a novel
I know we're
idea?
coming to
That,
the end of
that
our
just
time
seems like a straightforward integration
soon
of the two
anyway.
concepts.
It's nice to end on a shared point of interest, which is the Baldwin effect and the archetype's potential origin in the Baldwin effect. Do you think that is something that is worth exploring further? Is that something that we can
Well, it's crucial
that we
to
can
it's
test?
crucial to
I think
this
it's
because
interesting. Yes.
So, Richard, the Baldwin effect applied not so much just to the mimetic preference for people who stand up, for example, but something like a dragon, the abstracted predator. Is there any kind of Baldwin effect implication of this kind of
I
thing?
think there could be. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea that Jungian archetypes could be Baldwinized memes.
And perhaps the dragon could be one of those
Well, you didn't
somehow.
have that terminology,
No, of
even
course.
the Baldwin effect
No, of course.
terminology, but that notion is implicit in his writings. Like he was struggling. He also didn't precisely understand sexual selection, let's say. So the idea lurks implicitly in his work. There's never a statement like that, but you can see clear indications of his struggling towards something like a Baldwin effect explanation.
Chaps,
Depends on the Baldwin effect.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, sir. I'm very happy that I
Thank
had
you
the
very
opportunity
much.
to talk to you today. Thank you very much, Alex, for hosting this, and for everybody who is watching and listening, as Alex pointed out.
All
we're going
right.
to turn-
And then they have the extended discussion, which, I have to decide if it's worth looking at. I don't know. This felt like a little bit anticlimactic. So, what did they accomplish in this discussion? That there are commonalities in the Baldwin effect and then the Jungian archetypes. The idea that the process of evolving ideas, propagating in the conceptual metaphysical space, occurs in tandem with the propagation of different strategies in the genetic and sexually reproductive space. Okay, yeah, integration between mind and body. I mean, that's just like saying when I have thoughts, there's certain electricity that my cells do. So if my thoughts do all these cool advanced things, you'll see different types of patterns in the biological realm, because the mind leaves an imprint on the body, like a foot leaves a footprint on the snow. And of course, vice versa, the body leaves an imprint on the mind in a similar kind of way. So I'm not sure what what was so fascinating. I mean, I guess it finally at the end of it, they got to some sort of agreement. I think they could have. I think if there was better good faith approach, and I don't want to single out Dawkins here, but they should have come to this shared realization in the first 15, 20 minutes of the conversation, and then they could have had more of a conversation on that shared ground. So I thought for a conversation between two such titans, I thought this was a pretty basic synthesis, basic ground covered, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know, what were we hoping for? That atheists and Christians, or I wouldn't characterize Jordan Peterson as a Christian, but that atheists will finally be compelled by the force of rationality to abandon their reductionist psychological approach and tendencies, that they will open their mind to accept different categories of evidence. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what I was hoping for, something closer to that, but I don't know. I don't know what's discussed in the follow-up conversations at the Daily Wire, what else they're going to discuss, but yeah, I don't know. So how could we extend this argument further here in the next, just closing down here in the next couple minutes? It's still, conceptually it has to do with, are you bringing your attention to biology first and then seeing the mental phenomenon as an extrapolation, an extension, kind of like when people say, here's the cells, and then consciousness emerges. So this kind of before and after scenario that a lot of materialists, atheists, determinists think through. Or, as Jordan is saying, and here's how I would phrase it, that's the incorrect order. You can't think in sequence where you have biology and then consciousness. That's inappropriate because biology and consciousness are always intertwined and in tandem. As a matter of fact, my actual process of imagining before biology, after consciousness, that process is occurring through the vehicle of consciousness. So it's impossible to even orient myself and experience the before and after. So therefore, it's almost nonsensical to suggest that as a model of reality. Again, the suggestion that reality is base layer physical and then metaphysical kind of is a bonus pack, right? It's like base reality, the base trading cards, right? It's like it's physical, and then you have the bonus pack or the bonus add-on. So of consciousness. That's just a fundamentally flawed way of looking at things. And Jordan tried to encourage Dawkins to see that by arguing that these archetypes, the consciousness layer, can never be separated from the fact layer and the physical layer. But, Dawkins didn't get there yet. Maybe he'll get there later. Because the idea is it takes energy. It takes energy to be an atheist, to be reductionist. Because your consciousness and your metaphysical and the art and the beauty and the dragons, they always flood in as by virtue of being human. And so it takes energy to push them out of the way and kind of like hold the door closed while the water's trying to pour in. And that's what Dawkins and these guys look like, is they're pausing the flow of data of consciousness in reality. And they're trying to, look at the world. And what they're doing is they're creating a controlled scenario, almost like a controlled experiment, which, hey, in some sense, that's good. But what's a mistake is to say that the controlled experiment is actually emblematic of reality itself. This thing where you're holding the door shut, you're pushing the water of consciousness, you're doing your little analysis. That's fine if you acknowledge it as a hypothetical analysis, but as soon as you claim that your analysis is now reflective of actual reality, it's artificial because you're holding the door. You're keeping reality closed off. So it's a little bit insane. And you can't really keep it closed off because your brain is still impacted by it, by the consciousness. So maybe this got a little too esoteric there at the end, but these invisible things are hard to talk about in any other terms as well. So I don't know. What did you think? Were you disappointed by this Dawkins and Peterson conversation? Could it have been better? Is there anything in this conversation that you found useful? I'm curious, but yeah, let's, I don't know. These things used to be pretty cool. I don't know. I didn't find this as exciting. But anyway, if you enjoyed this, if you want to pursue the ultimate hero's journey, the ultimate archetypes, download Holy Habits. Go to the App Store, download Holy Habits, and you will have a prescribed plan to become the ultimate hero, a saint, fully sanctified through the grace of Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later. God bless.